So I'm going to go to Teams. I'm inside of our team and in the general channels. Let's go to Files and let's open up 3 of them together. The first one that we are going to open up, as per usual, is the syllabus so that we can see where we are at. And of course, I opened it in Teams by mistake instead of in Excel like I want to. So let's open that there. And then let's go back to Teams, General Channels, and let's go into the files again. And let's open up this course notes tab too, because we are going to use that as well for this particular section. And then I have a copy of the textbook that I finally remembered to download and put onto my desktop. And we'll see that what we're working on this entire week is Chapter 31, Aggregate Expenditures. So inside of this course notes file, then, I have one labeled for today, 319 for Chapter 31. Let's start on page 601 in the textbook. So page 601 in the textbook is going to give us a particular table that helps us understand a little bit more about the construction of aggregate expenditures. And aggregate expenditures is going to look very similar to GDP, and that's on purpose. So starting off at 601, what I want you to focus in on is first this construct that we're looking for this mythical idea of equilibrium. The way I always describe that is equilibrium when what we produce is equal to what we buy. So I always call it no want, no waste. No waste means we produced everything, and no want means everybody's got what they liked. Now we're going to start off with this notion, though, of a private closed economy, which means for us we're really only thinking about the consumer function and the business function. We don't have business, government, or the international sector in here. So I've taken the liberty of taking table 31.2 and put it into our notes tab. And what I'd like to do with you is first review the columns and then show you some of the basic calculations so you can see how equilibrium will work. So it starts off with this notion of we have to put people to work in order to create production, which we know we've called GDP, which on a production approach, we can also say is equal to what we plan to spend when it's our disposable income, when disposable income is income minus tax. We know then that consumers can either spend or save, and the aggregation of what they do is equal to that real GDP income that they make. Here's the business function in there, and you notice that it's a standard 20 across the board. We're going to talk about the investment function and why that looks as it does, but we'll do that in another video. It's columns 6 and 7 that are the only real basic calculations, but it's 8 that really gives us the policy implications of what the numbers mean relative to economics and what we want to do about it to try to get to equilibrium. So let's just look at how this works. So I've reproduced the table down below, and in the table down below, we can see, for example, at the 40 million possible levels of employment, we have a 370 total GDP. But when people are wanting to consume $375 worth, that means that we have to dip into our savings to be able to get to that additional level of consumption because we have not earned enough money to buy it all. Businesses step into the economy and they invest in things like long-term property, plant, and equipment to give an additional 22, what is then our planned aggregate expenditures in column 6, which would be equal to the consumption plus businesses. And now we see at that planned expenditures level, we have $395 worth of planned expenditures where we're only producing 370. So in this case, if we take real GDP and we subtract off aggregate expenditures, what you see is that means that we've got $25 worth of consumption that we need to go ahead and figure out where is that going to come from because we haven't made enough. Well, look at what this is then called. This is unplanned changes of inventories. So think about it when you go into Walgreens and after a season, they have the discounted items from the Christmas sales because it's now January the 9th. Well, that's inventory that they didn't get to sell, but they still keep some in the back and we can pull it out that next Christmas and sell it again. But that's something that we're not planning on because we were only able to make 370. We were hoping to spend 370. But what that means is then look at what the tendencies are of employment. So if we're only employing 45 and people are wanting to consume more than we are able to produce, well, what are they going to do? Chances are businesses are going to hire and put people back to work. Well, then what will happen to output? When businesses hire and put people back to work, look what happens to GDP. It has the ability to increase. Well, when now more people work and are producing more GDP, what happens to our income? Our income also should increase. And so we can see how that works. And let's go ahead and just copy and paste that down for a few rows until we go down to the opposite end of the equation, where imagine we have this going on in the economy instead. You have 85 people at work making a GDP of 550, but people only want to consume 510. What does that mean? That they have 40 left over that they can save, and businesses are still kicking in their standard 20. So again, aggregate expenditures is equal to the expenditures plus the consumers plus businesses. So now we're producing 550, but we only want 530. And so what does that mean? Now you've got excess inventories that are stocking up into the Walgreens. So what is that going to then do to what we think about employment, output, and income? Well, we've got too many people working, making too many things. And so what we're going to do is we will put in place policies that will then decrease the amount of employment. That then decreases the amount of output that we can make. And then that decreases the amount of income that households can earn. So if we copy and paste this up a couple, and we recognize that that's going to take place across several different levels of GDP along the way, that those decreases are going to continue for several years. So let's take a look at this case in the middle now for a moment, and recognize I'm spazzing around a little bit on my formula or my formatting here. So let me just fix that real quick so that I can make it look uniform. All right, so now that we've got that fixed, let's look at this magical one in here. If 65 people are creating 470 in GDP, of which 450 of it gets consumed, and then consumers put away the remaining 20 into savings. Businesses go ahead and kick in 20 in their spending, and so aggregate expenditures is consumers plus businesses. And now there's 470, which leaves us with this notion of we've now made exactly the aggregation of what both businesses and households want. And that's the point that we like to call equilibrium. Equilibrium is a neat concept. I've never actually seen it in play in the real world, but it is that notion of if economics is the study of how to take scarce resources, maximize efficiency in order to create the greatest amount of happiness through production that is no want, no waste, that would be at equilibrium, as is shown for you in a private closed economy on table 31.2 in page 601 of the text.